Computer. All right. Hey, everybody. This is your commie preacher here on the Church of the Revolution YouTube channel. Today is December 29th. We are here in what, the fifth or fourth day of Christmas? I don't remember. Um, but I did get a t-shirt for the occasion. So, I'm dreaming of a red Christmas. All right. So this channel is for communists, Christians, atheists, anybody, the wide spectrum who are communists, but also think religion has a role to play in the revolutionary changes we need in our world. And I'm really excited today to be joined by a local Chicagoan for the first time on this channel,
Oh,
who is an African American activist. I'll let him tell you what he's all about. This is Diallo Kenyatta, who is sitting right next to me here on the screen. So, yeah, give us a little introduction, Diallo.
well, yeah. My name is Diallo Kenyatta. I'm a revolutionary Pan-Africanist, and that's it. That's pretty much not much to me beyond that.
And you have a YouTube channel,
Yes,
African World Order.
yes. African World Order, and then I have like my personal YouTube channel, Diallo Kenyatta, at Diallo Kenyatta. Yep.
All right, so when I put this up, I'll put links to both of your channels.
Yeah, that'd be
Um,
cool.
so we do want to encourage everybody. I think your views are probably higher than mine right now, but that's because I've been sort of in a productive slump for a while. Hopefully, this will be the beginning of new and better things. Um, all right. So I discovered you on what used to be known as Black Power Media, which is now Black Liberation Media. You were doing the Friday show. I think it was called
Yeah,
Earn Your Liberation.
yeah.
You and Jared and Geechee Yaw, Jared Ball, who is the author of The Myth and Propaganda of Black Buying Power.
Mm.
And you guys were doing it every Friday for a couple of years.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
It went on for quite some time. But we knew each other before that. I knew Guichi long before that,
Okay.
So I've known them outside of the show. So
Sure.
yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Well, I mean, I get the sense that a lot of the people who were involved in creating the channel were
Yeah, yeah.
knew each other from various contexts. Was it Jared Ball who kind of brought all of that together, or
No, it's
was he?
actually Geechee. It was, I
Oh,
think,
Geechee
if
was
I
the
was to
one.
credit, but if you ask all three of us, I'm sure you get a different answer. But from my perspective,
It's
it was
like a car
Geechee who
wreck.
kind of,
Who knows
yeah,
the truth?
right. So, if anybody would be credit for bringing the three of us together, it would be Geechee,
Okay, for
who
that
I,
Friday show
yeah,
specifically.
yeah.
Okay.
So,
Because the
yeah.
channel, I don't know how long the channel had been around when the Friday show started.
Yeah, it would have been around much longer, for
Okay.
years before, and then I was invited on, and it kind of grew organically just from discussions we were having online and offline, and
Right.
our engagement and how many of our views, strategy, and tactics overlapped. So it was good
Yeah.
chemistry. It was fun while it lasted. But if,
Yeah.
like I said, yeah, Takichi goes to glory. He's the one that brought it together.
Okay. Okay. So he sort of invented the earn your liberation conversations.
Well, yeah, well, he would dialogue and engage with me, and then he would dialogue and engage with Dr. Ball, and then he would kind of bring us together. And then I think it was eventually we were all having the discussion on Dr. Ball's channel,
Right.
and so it kind of came
Oh, I
together
mix what I
organically.
mix what I like.
Yes, that's
It
what
was
we were
on that.
doing.
It was
It was
originally in a mix of what I like, and I
right.
noticed.
Yeah,
I
Geechee
noticed
was
he's
on
done
there as a
more of that
guest, and
lately.
then he said, yeah. So
Yeah,
yeah,
because as you know, Black Liberation Media kind of Black Power Media went under a little bit of an internal
yeah,
conflict and resulted in renaming the channel and a whole other channel spinning off,
yeah,
calling itself Black Power Media.
yeah,
Um, I don't want to give the details because I wasn't involved. I just was watching it in real time.
yeah,
But
yeah, yeah. That's the thing when you engage with radical free thinkers, sometimes they engage in radical free thought. So, so
or shenanigans, as we might say.
well, yeah, we fall victim to our own principles sometimes, but it's fine.
It's
I'm still
fine.
fully united with the left
Yeah.
and the
Well,
left goal.
I know that I do subscribe to Black Power Media still, well, the new version. And I know it's a progressive Professor Griff is like a major uh, celebrity on there now. So that's an interesting thing in and of itself. We don't need to discuss that, but I will say, just for your edification about me, I, of course, was introduced to that whole, well, it's complicated. I don't remember whether I saw uh, Do the Right Thing first or I saw Public Enemy in concert first. I don't remember. I was in college for about 2 years at the end of the 80s, and Public Enemy was making a splash at that time, as was Spike Lee, and then of course Do the Right Thing, which really prominently featured Public Enemy. So I was introduced to the more radical black left culture through those two. Although I know where Public Enemy is now is a whole different story. But in the day, they were incendiary and exciting for those of us on the left. So
yeah, I was actually a fan of Public Enemy, but I tell you when things changed for me, when the Terminator 2 movie came out and the protagonist had on a Public Enemy shirt.
Oh my.
In a major Hollywood production.
Right.
I knew that it was pretty much
where it was going
of things. Yeah, I that greatly bothered me because being in revolutionary hip hop and conscious hip hop from the get-go, to see that it was being embraced by the mainstream, I pretty much knew, that was the writing on the wall
was upon us
for the genre as a whole, and for conscious artists in particular. That was kind of while everyone was praising that back in the day, I know it was quite some time ago, but everyone was like, isn't it wonderful that the protagonist in a major film has a Public Enemy shirt, and validated, and that the dominant culture and the dominant media apparatus is embracing this alternative art form? And I'm like, oh, we're doomed.
Y'all are fool. Y'all are foolish. That's not going to go anywhere.
They actually asked Chuck D about it, and Chuck D was like, oh, I think it's a wonderful thing. And I'm like, oh gosh, here we go again. Here we go.
Yeah.
That hip hop is going to go the way of rock and roll, blues, jazz, funk.
Yeah,
country,
we could analyze the pop culture for a long time.
Yeah,
about
black
how
culture
it's always
being,
the same.
Yeah, co-opted. Yeah,
how it's always making somebody rich, and the rest of us ain't getting rich. We just being entertained.
Yeah.
So on your channel, what would you say is your mission, your goal? I mean, you said revolutionary Pan-Africanism, but is there any sort of concrete thing, recurring themes, recurring topics that really drive your work?
Yeah, well, if it would be broader, I advocate for and articulate the perspective of liberation, and that's liberation for the world, to liberate the world from the twin towers of oppression, which right now are white hegemony and capitalism.
Right.
So my message is pro-liberation, anti-white hegemony, anti-capitalism, and all of the victims and targets of white hegemony and capitalism, starting with the ecosystem, the biosphere, the life-sustaining capacity of the earth is being undermined and destroyed. I was just reading an article last night that the coral reefs, the planetary coral reefs, are on a downslope to total extinction, and they have crossed a crucial line where there is no recovering the planetary coral reefs, which will cause cascading collapse. So the environment, I think, is the number one, the ecosystems, and how the system of production and drive for profit is destroying the planetary ecosystem, and then entrenching unjust hierarchies, unjust social, political, cultural hierarchies, such as race, such as patriarchy, such as class hierarchy. So to attack all unjust hierarchies. And that's pretty much it. And I try to interpret, contemporary news and cultural events from a Pan-African revolutionary perspective. I talk about history, and I also talk about the trajectory and target. And I offer some, not just analysis, but some particular solutions or actions that individuals and communities and groups should take to address that, the twin systems of oppression, white hegemony, or what people mistakenly call global white supremacy, but white domination, white hegemony, white aggression, and capitalism.
Can I just dig into that for just a second on the white hegemony versus global white supremacy?
Mm.
Um, so do you know who is it Vivek Chibber? Who is a big theorist in the Democratic Socialists of America, the sort of white socialist left, although he's not white. But he argues that there really isn't any global white supremacy. But you qualify that by saying there is white hegemony. So how do you draw that distinction?
Well, white hegemony, even those who are institutions that we identify as challenging white hegemony, are exist in response to or in opposition to white hegemony. Um, I'm not sure how anyone would deny the economic system, the military systems, the orientation, the very maps in existence from Pakistan, India, Indonesia, the various countries in Africa, the very existence of the concept of Latin America, or dividing the world in the Western and Eastern hemisphere, the very concept of third world, first world, that is now developing nations and first world nations. All of that is a byproduct of white hegemony,
Right.
and the relentless assault coming out of Western Europe of the pathological and hyperaggression coming in the pathological culture coming out of Western Europe. Everything is the modern world as we know it, as we were born into, was structured by this historical reality, this historical phenomenon, and these hierarchical relationships. And I
Right.
think to deny it is to allow it to perpetuate.
Right.
You know, it's a malignant metastatic type system that if we simply say, well, it's so horrible that I don't want to acknowledge it, I don't want to identify it because it's such an ugly thing, I think those people are assets to the system. The only
Right.
way to really root it out is to acknowledge, to diagnose it before you can construct a cure or a remedy for the problem. So
Right.
I would love to see how someone can explain the existence and structure of the modern world and modern relationships, and not identify how white hegemony is at the root of it. There was Dr. Wade B. Noble, a psychologist and a social scientist, stated that, now he uses the language of white supremacy, but he said, until you understand white supremacy, everything you think you know will only confuse you. So if you try to interpret anything in reality outside of the context of white supremacy, then it will only confuse you.
Okay.
So understanding and accepting the reality of global white hegemony is at the root to comprehending any other phenomenon you experience or observe in society, in your life personally as an individual, or in much grander scale of societies and nations.
I tend to agree 100%. The only point of my question was really why not call it global white supremacy
Oh, I'm
versus
sorry.
by calling it white hegemony. No, no, you did a good
Well,
analysis of what we're dealing with, and some of my audience is not clued in, I'm sure. So go ahead.
well, the reason I don't call it supremacy is because, well, when we look at the term supreme, it is interpret something that is better, something
Ah,
that
okay.
surpasses all other things. So Michael Jackson is a supreme performer.
Right.
Michael Jordan is a supreme athlete.
Right.
But if we allowed Michael Jordan to go out on the basketball court and he's automatically given 50 points on the board before the game starts, his goal is 4 feet tall and the other team's goal is risen to 20 feet tall. And he's
So
allowed to carry a hammer and a taser onto the field. And doesn't, and so none of the rules that apply to basketball apply to Michael Jordan. And thus, the way Michael Jordan was able to be a top scorer or a leading athlete is that there were strict limitations placed on everyone else who plays against him or even plays with him. And the playing field is literally imbalanced to his behalf. No one would call him a supreme basketball. They would identify him as a cheater, as someone who has warped the game, who has destroyed the game. So when I think of supreme, whether it's an athlete or academia or any area where you think of an individual or a group that surpasses another individual or groups, it's because they have demonstrated skills well beyond.
Right.
So if white people were truly supreme, they would not have had to engage in many of the myriad of behaviors, up to and including from today going to the past, going from making it illegal for African people to read and cultivate their intellect during chattel slavery, during Jim Crow up till now, underfunding our schools, under resourcing our, because you're just, if you're supreme, just you could exist in a world that is fair, balanced, just, merit based, all the shit that they claim that the world is, that Trump, everybody gets a fair shake, everybody gets a chance, and others. But we know through tons of documentation that Europeans have fixed the playing field, have engaged in subversion, espionage, assassination, coup d'etats, and all sorts of underhanded. So this is not survival of the fittest, it's survival of the slickest or survival of the sickest. So you can come through domination through just, you can come to domination or supremacy through just equal competition. And if you do that, society will generally say, well, hey, this guy deserves to be recognized in their field or their arena because they came with all the tools everyone else had and outpaced and outran, outperformed everyone else. But the moment you find out, hey, there was some deceit, there was some trickery, there was some imbalance, there was some unfair advantage given to one group to another, we don't call that supreme. We call that cheating. We call that unfairness. So I haven't seen anywhere in Western history where Europeans engage with other cultures in a just, honest, open manner and outcompeted them. I've seen where the West was more aggressive, more warlike, more genocidal, more dishonest.
Yep.
But if you can show me any time in history where the whites, people who identify as white, engage with another group on a just and equitable level and simply outperformed them, outthought them, outmaneuvered them, I'd say, okay, wow, these people are really, really something else. Also, we understand about supremacy is that we tend to think things must be built up and improved. But yet we see everywhere that things begin to deteriorate, stagnate, and collapse under Western hegemony. Now, we don't count it as that because the victors write the stories, but we have examples of civilizations where I don't even like the language related to white hegemony is all warped. We call them settlers. When they came in and brought immense levels of disruption, ecosystem and societal disruption, but we call them settlers. We call them privileged. As I always say, privilege is something you give a well-behaved child. It's not something you give a genocidal maniac. We call them privileged when they behave in pathological ways to grant themselves unfair advantages, undue advantages and additional resources that they didn't earn or work for, inability or unwillingness to share or cooperate with others. We call that privilege when it's really pathology. So the whole language around white hegemony and capitalism has been distorted. And as we speak, we think. So as we think, so we speak. So I'm trying to just apply more accurate language and accurate terminologies to the phenomenon we face so we can better understand it instead of distorting it. And I have no problem with identifying an individual or a group as supreme if you can demonstrate to me where they've actually been. Now, if you want to define deceit, cheating, treachery, assassination, subversion, if you want to say, hey, those things are also recognized skills that we should aspire to, then so be it. Rewrite the laws, rewrite the codes. But even in the Western code, they say that these things aren't appropriate and they deny that they exist. So they understand that it's wrong and inappropriate. So even according to their rules, they're not supreme.
I would agree. I really like that analysis, white hegemony versus the idea of supremacy as the best possible a thing can be. And obviously, white control of the planet is not the best possible because it is carried out through extreme violence, extreme control of the economics and wealth and all of that. So I think we're in agreement. I just had never thought about that distinction of supremacy versus hegemony. That's a helpful way to think about it.
Well, yeah, I think when it comes to the dominant system, we all are trying to maneuver and position ourselves to, number one, elevate within the system, and number two, avoid the harsh consequences of living in the system. So
Right.
we think and speak in such a way that will give us that outcome. If we don't call a rapist a sexual supremacist.
Okay.
We don't call cancer cellular supremacy.
Mm. Okay.
And people would look at you weird. You know, if I went out into my neighborhood as a child and stole someone's bicycle and brought it home, they wouldn't call me as a child a bicycle supremacist.
Right.
Say Diallo went around the neighborhood with a knife and stole a dozen bikes. I have more bikes than everyone else. So obviously I'm doing better than every other child in the neighborhood. They would look, it's like, well, how did you come into possession of those bicycles? Right. Well, I took them by force from weaker, less civilized kids. Nobody would call me the bicycle supremacist. They would punish me. They would force me to return the bikes. So if we look at what we define as white supremacy, all the money, all the gold, all the territory, how their language, how European language and European religion and European culture has saturated the globe.
Right.
And we ask, how did this come to be? Did anybody come to the door of Europe and say, hey, you guys got it going on here. You guys got the best economic system, best culture. We love how you treat your women. We love how you treat your racial minorities. Can you come to our land, to our territory, and teach us this and share this with? Nobody asked Europe for shit.
Right.
They came and imposed it by force. So when we apply it to anything else, when we apply the language and rationale of supremacy to anything else in reality, we realize, no, that's not really appropriate. But when it comes to the dominant system, you're not allowed to say those things because those are the people who hire and fire, who pay and can incarcerate, isolate, exile. So they have the power. So we have to speak politely about the oppressor. And that's been that way until people get out from under oppression.
I think we've really put a fine point on that. And I appreciate your perspective. It's a little new to me, but that's okay. I like the word hegemony for other reasons. So it makes good sense to swap it out with supremacy. So let's try to dive a little bit into what I proposed as the basic topic, because I don't know what time you have, but I kind of want to stop about 2:30 our time. Mm-hmm. And we can quit sooner if that's better for you. So I get the sense that you and I both possibly grew up in similar ways. We were raised Christians.
Yeah, but that's probably the end of the line.
Right. But we were both raised that way.
Yeah,
we were both
I
raised.
was raised. Yes, I was.
What kind of a church did you grow up in, or was there more than one?
I was raised, my family was initially Methodist.
Okay.
And then I had a great uncle, my grandmother's baby brother, who was called by God to be a Baptist and to be a minister in the Baptist religion. So the whole family went from Methodist to Baptist.
Interesting.
When I was very young. So at 12, I was baptized as Baptist by Covenant Missionary Baptist Church by my great uncle, Pastor Gene Bowie, who has passed on. And, I was in church. I was usher, choir. We would go out canvassing, the whole nine. I was thoroughly indoctrinated into the Christian faith. And I attended a Catholic school, high school as well.
Wow. Okay. That's interesting. So just to give my parallel version, although there's going to be a lot of differences, I was raised Pentecostal. And that continued up until I was about 18 or 19 when I started questioning some of that stuff. Although I probably questioned a little earlier, but my dad was a preacher. My grandfather was a preacher. My great grandfather was an elder. So it goes 3 generations back, which is really rare. I'm actually a 4th generation Pentecostal, but that's not common. There are a few others of us. I don't know if you ever heard of Carlton Pearson.
Mm-mm.
Yeah, he was an alumnus of Oral Roberts University and started a big mega church in Tulsa. He's African American, so comes out of I think the Church of God in Christ, but
Mm.
he, went in that mega church thing, and because he was the black adopted son of Oral Roberts, he was really
Wow.
considered quite a thing.
Sick in the
Anyway,
head.
so he and I grew up similar. He's about 10 years older than me. I'm 62, almost 63. He just died a couple of years ago. But in that time, he went through a conversion, became a Universalist, and even hung out with Unitarians. I mean, he really went off the reservation. He was forced out of his whole Pentecostal charismatic milieu at one point. But
Yeah.
my story is that, I grew up, my father traveled around Illinois, Peoria, Bushnell, and then Chicago, and then Rochelle, and then we moved back to Texas, which is home. That's where all my family comes from, really, is from Texas. But I believed all that stuff. I spoke in tongues. I was baptized at the age of 9. I asked my grandpa to baptize me because he was pastoring a church in Abilene, Texas, which is my hometown. And so I went to Bible college for one semester, and I had been deeply influenced by a thing called the Jesus movement. Now, I don't think that actually hit the black churches really at all, although Andre Crouch, if you know who that is,
Mm.
was considered kind of in the Jesus movement milieu because his music was more contemporary, more pop, less, gospel. So that was happening in the 70s when I'm getting, moving towards 10 years old. And so I started growing my hair real long when I was a teenager. And my
Mm.
dad hated it, but I said, but we're Jesus freaks. We're the hippies.
Yeah.
We're the counterculture of Christianity. So that's where my sort of weird direction began. Then I discovered things like Sojourners Magazine, which is an anti-war, anti-poverty Christian magazine, anti-racist Christian magazine, and that began to shift my theology.
Mm.
Now, all that said, I did go through a complete loss of faith. And for about 2 decades, I would have said I'm a non-theistic Quaker. I was going to a Quaker meeting because I liked the silence. It was a lot different than the churches I grew up in. It was the opposite. I could sit there and meditate for an hour, and nobody would bug me. And so I just stopped believing hardly any of it. Um, but at the same time, you grow up with that. There's something like inside you, right? That's Christian, even though you don't believe that anymore. At least I didn't believe it anymore. I would still say I don't believe the resurrection was a literal miracle. I think it's a story. It's a story about Jesus becoming greater than the Roman emperor. That's all it is. It's meant to do. Because emperors rose from the dead. If you didn't know, of course they did. And Jesus was just made to rise from the dead because he was the Messiah. Anyhow, that's my take. I am now identified somewhat uncomfortably with Christianity. Like I went to Christmas Eve service with of one of my colleagues, and when they started on certain themes, I just like, oh, I forgot about this. I haven't been to a church where this was a major theme in so long. And it was just like, ugh, it's still cringy. And yet, I will say at a certain level, my communism is a result of reading the Bible a certain way, which is known as liberation theology, which I'm sure you've heard of.
Mm.
Um, so that's just me. Like I say, I'm a bad Christian because I don't believe most of the creeds. I don't believe most of the miracles. I don't believe any of the miracle stories. And yet, to me, there is still something compelling about Jesus separated from a lot of the stuff around him, which is almost impossible to do, as you would agree.
Right. Yeah,
Anyway,
I totally agree. When I exited the church much early, I was a true believer. And being that Christianity as an African, Christianity was we came through to Christianity through imperialism, colonization,
yep.
um, chattel slavery, and to carry that tradition and elements of slavery and self-rejection, self-hate,
Hmm.
the demonization and rejection of our true selves, and the demonization and rejection of our indigenous and original um, spirituality and culture is a much bigger element, than a white Christian and their awakening.
Right.
And when I was 14 years old and I began to learn the truth of African history and African people's relationship to Christianity, and also, my great uncle was atypical. You know, he drove a big Cadillac and had a storefront church in the middle of the ghetto. Myself and many of my fellow congregants lived in public housing in abject poverty and was scraping together, you know, addiction, you know, the CIA crack cocaine. I came up at the height of the CIA uh, crack cocaine biochemical warfare against the Black community. And both
Mhm.
of my parents were severe addicts. And I was told that if I was
Mm.
a good Christian kid, my Jesus would save my parents from addiction if I pray and conducted myself properly, which was, you know, an
Oh
extreme
God,
mind
what a
fuck
that's
to tell a
that's a
child that, damn, you
mind
know,
fuck. I agree with
right.
you.
My parents are strung out because I'm not, you know, I'm having dirty thoughts as an emerging child, you know, as
I'm
a
sorry to laugh because
prepubescent.
it's so
Yeah,
horrible, but it's
yeah.
also
So I'm
like
thinking, you know, dirty thoughts about little girls
me
and as a
too.
little boy. So
But
anyway, all that
in
to
your
say,
context,
you
it was a
know,
whole other story.
yeah. So yeah, it's nothing good. It was but what was curious to me that I left the church at 14,
Mm,
and I was adopted by my grandmother. My parents lost custody of me and my siblings,
right.
and she said that one of the things she said that if you're going to live with me and I'm going to raise you, you're going to have to walk in the light of Christ.
Wow.
And so she said, you know, if you don't go to church and pay your tithe and be in the choir, then you'll have to find something else to do, which to me meant foster care. And I grew up in the Midwest. I grew up in Kansas City, Missouri, which was racist, and the foster care system was horrible. Everywhere is racist, but there's a particular type of Midwestern racism that you
Yep.
don't get in the South or anywhere else that we can go into some other time. But anyway, long story short, I told her, listen, you're gonna have to send me to foster care because I can't spend my Sunday mornings listening to this man, you know, getting on public transit to go listen to this man who pulled up in a Cadillac with all and tell these poor people about how we should live our lives. So, and I'm related to dude. So
Yeah.
long story short, she didn't. It was a bluff, and I called her bluff, and so I left the church at 14, but it took me more than a decade after that because when I
Sure.
left the church, I was still extremely homophobic.
Yeah.
I was sexist, you know, patriarchal, however you want to call it. All
Mm,
of the warped and sick ideas about the world, the origins of humanity, the nature of man and the nature of woman, and all of that. Still, it took me decades to purge because I had been taught that since I have memory. I was
right.
raised in the church, I was baptized in the church, and even when I rejected the church, I tried to create some amalgamated Afrocentric Christianity,
Right.
like, oh, Jesus was a black man, that type of bullshit, and the original religion. And I was going to try to find the true Christianity, not the white man's Christianity, but the true, which is all nonsense. Which was all nonsense. So I just created some amalgamated Afrocentric spirituality, uh, uh, Western Christianity but I would still have all those distortions
Yeah.
which warped my perceptions and my relationships and my behaviors for so many years long after I left the church. So it's not even
Sure.
enough to say, well, I don't believe and I leave anymore because the residue, the
Right.
remnants of indoctrination you have to work on and deconstruct over a lifetime, really.
I agree with you. Even at my age, I'm still there's a thing or two that I'm working on. I
Yeah.
You mentioned the homophobia because that was one of the last things I dropped. I dropped that when I was in my, I want to say, so 1997. I started going to a Quaker meeting. And if there is a sect that's tried to be different, I would say they tried in an interesting way. But and modern Quakers are definitely liberals. They're some of them are anti-capitalist, but it's not like they're mainly main thing they're known for is pacifism. But not every Quaker is a pacifist. At any rate, when I ended up in the Quaker um, congregation, eventually, well, one half the meeting was gay, so I had to drop that homophobia like really fast, which I
Yeah.
did. I met real gay people, and all of a sudden, like, oh, they're human. They're just like me. They. So yeah, I agree. You gotta peel all that stuff off. And at the end, like I said, I became a non-believer. I was calling myself a non-theist, and that was even too much for some Quakers, because for them, God is this spiritual force you encounter in your silence of your soul. And I'm like, well, what I'm doing is just listening to the noise inside my soul and trying to figure out what's worth paying attention to and what's good and bad. I'm not trying to hear God. Um, again, I only sort of pulled God back in, although it's mainly, I say God language more than God in any classical sense. I think that, the universe is a marvelous creative engine. Look at all the planets and stars and galaxies and just amazing. Why not call that God? So that's kind of where I'm at, is like, call nature God. If you got to call anything God, call the cosmos God. So yeah, I totally agree that it took a lot of deconstruction and destruction of my former religious beliefs to get past a lot of the garbage that is still to this day shoved around. Like I said, I went to a liberal Methodist Lutheran church. There are two congregations that share a building, and they did a combined Christmas Eve, and there were some really nice things because they talked about liberating the poor, they talked about fighting racism, but they also praised the Lord in the highest, and God in three persons, all that classical language that I'm like, oh man, it still rings wrong for me, even though I know these are liberals. They don't believe it either. Anyway, so that's why I say bad Christians can make good leftists and revolutionaries like me. So
But they're
anyhow,
eventually going to hit a wall, though,
well, I
because
hit the wall and I came out the other side. That's my story. For decades, I was not a theist. I was not a Christian. And then bit by bit, I let Jesus back in, but on a very limited basis, sort of me controlling the narrative now. So I say
and
basically everything in the Bible, except for maybe parts of the Gospels, are important to me.
right. Well, here's the thing about Jesus, and I don't know why Jesus
Yeah.
gets so much
Yeah.
good press from leftists and liberals,
Okay.
because Jesus asserted himself. Like the the fallacy is Jesus somehow transformed Christianity and turned it from this death cult, this murder death cult, this blood cult, into
Right.
a system of compassion and loving and feeding and healing. But Jesus said himself, I didn't come to circumvent the law. I came to enforce the law. The only thing Jesus changed about Christianity is says, well, instead of slaughtering lambs, I will be the last and final sacrifice. Because before me, you had to, in order to atone for your sins, you had to slaughter all these animals and do all this weird ritual, blood ritual stuff.
Right.
The word blessing literally means to drench in blood. Now I will be the final blood sacrifice of this blood religion, this murder cult. And then through my final sacrifice, you all will be cleansed. But everything else is still locked in. Everything else my father did or said is still on point. He didn't come and say, my father was wrong for drowning all those people. My father was wrong for telling them folks to go in there and murder all the men and women and take the virgin children as your bride. My father was wrong for murdering those children with bears for
Now, bald
mocking the
man.
bald man. My father was wrong for telling those girls to sleep with their father or allowing those girls to intoxicate their father and get impregnated by their father and turning his wife into a pillar of salt. He never denounced
Right.
or distanced himself from any of the atrocities of the Old Testament. He never, any of that. So I don't give Jesus or the New Testament a pass or distance or separate it from the Old Testament. God is a vengeful God who intends to kill all of us when he gets ready to. And then send the vast majority of us for eternal torture.
Right.
I mean, that is still Christianity, even with the friendly Jesus, the hippie Jesus that's going to give you some loaves of bread and some fish and
Right.
some wine for free. And that's why most people that even enter into, and this is the thing about the good Christians. The good Christians provide vindication, legitimacy, and support for the true Christian, the imperialist Christians, the pro-genocide Christians, the Christian nationalists, the Christian fundamentalists. They would not thrive or have the power and status that they did if not for my grandmother who was a good Christian woman, a good, decent woman. My great grandmother, Grandma Bowie, one of the most kind and nurturing people and believed in Christ, prayed unrelenting prayer and consulting the scriptures. I know a lot of really good Christian people, and every single good Christian person I know provided legitimacy and cover for the true Christians. So that's my issue with good Christians, where you eventually are going to have to, if you say, I want justice, I want liberation, I want to end oppression, you're eventually going to have to target the institution of Christianity. And not just the institutions of Christianity, but the teachings, philosophies, and conclusions and objectives and goals of Christianity. So to be a good Christian, as you evolve as a good Christian, you have to become staunchly anti-Christ, anti-Christianity. Or how can you justify? Because a lot of people want to handpick oppressions. Like, I don't like racism. But, a lot of brothers I know is like, sexism and patriarchy, I can rock with that. I can see, but let's end racism. Right. A lot of people are like, well, let's end capitalism. But even within our anti-capitalist formations, I like the hierarchy. I like the status. I like authority within in our anti-capitalist formation. So everybody wants to pick and choose oppression that they believe will benefit them. And that's the same thing that happens amongst the good Christians. And we don't need any of it. Morality is a human construct. The very concept of good and evil and bad and wrong, and the very concept of God and Jesus were things constructed out of the human imagination. So why would we be subject to or submit ourselves to our own creations instead of directing and controlling what we create and acknowledging that we created it for better or worse?
You know what this reminds me of? If you've ever read Friedrich Engels' text on early Christianity, he says everything in the New Testament is just horrible and not worth it, except the book of Revelation, because that's when the poor and the oppressed overthrow and destroy all the capitalists. I don't know that I agree with his reading of the text, but he said everything else was worthless.
Right. And even in Revelation, like I said, Dr. John Henry Clark said, without exception, all Western religions are nothing more than male chauvinist murder cults. And there can be some good extracted. I've unfortunately been subjected to biblical teachings and been encouraged to read the Bible throughout my life.
Sure.
And then coming back to visit the Bible from a secular perspective and understanding these are not divine inspired words. This isn't even basic wisdom. In fact, the Bible lacks. I could find a toddler that has a better sense of morality than the God of the Bible, Quran and Torah, and has a better notion of fairness and right and wrong. But all that to say is, if we, how I say this, we ultimately, these things have done more. Like, let's take for you, capitalism has been around what? Even if you want to marry it to mercantilism or talk about earliest forms of capital, capitalism at being generous is 400 years old.
Right.
And that's being generous.
It was created by Europeans.
Yes. And so capitalism, after, let's say, 200 to 400 years of screwing over the world, we've realized, hey, this ain't going to work. We need something else.
Absolutely.
Communism, socialism, something else. Christianity has had over 2,000 years to prove its worth to humanity. And if you look at the 2,000 years of Christianity, wherever you want to put the birth, whether you want to say when Constantine took up the cross or when Jesus died on the cross, and I mean, Christianity has a lot of birth dates, but that happens with like origins. That's what happens with fiction. You know what I mean? How many different Spider-Man and origin stories do we have? That's what happens with fiction. But wherever you imagine the birth of Christianity started, because Christianity did not start with Jesus. Jesus didn't start. Jesus was not a Christian.
Right. He was
Some
not.
argue that Christianity started more than 4 to 6 centuries after Christ's crucifixion. But whenever you say it started, in all that time that Christianity has had an opportunity to demonstrate its value to humanity, do you say that it has made itself worthy has justified its existence, has justified billions of people adhering to this belief system and this value system.
Right.
Because if we can say, listen, which I agree, communism is a much better alternative. We need to abandon capitalism and do away with the infrastructure, the justification, the rationality of capitalism. None of it holds up. Throw it into the waste can of history. We need to purge capitalism from our societies. But Christianity's had much longer time to prove itself. And has it done so? Can anybody make that case or that justification? The benefits versus the atrocities and harms?
Yeah.
Simple logic to me.
I'm not going to be able to, in the last 12 minutes we have here, answer all of that because, one, I agree with a lot of it. I am someone who would say that early Christianity, before the Bible was canonized, right, before the New Testament was canonized, and a lot of people don't even know this, the Hebrew scriptures were canonized very late in their history. They weren't canonized back in Moses. They were canonized more in like the period of the Greco-Roman, the Greek conquest. When Alexander the Great took over Palestine, that's when the Hebrew scriptures got canonized. Or at best, when the Persians took over Palestine, that was when they canonized the scriptures. So even, saying that the book of Genesis goes all the way back, bullshit, it doesn't. It's a recent creation. And so, like I said, I tend to agree with you on the general mainstream Christianity. I don't take the Bible as God's word. I will say that the reason I am a communist has a lot to do with a couple of stories in the Bible. Like, I don't consider the Gospel of John to be a real story of Jesus. It's an invention, almost a century after Jesus lived. The first Gospel of Luke has Mary denouncing the rulers and the wealthy and lifting up the poor. And then Jesus at the end of the book of, near the end of the book of the Matthew says, all the nations that don't feed the hungry, don't care for the sick, they're going to be burned forever. But all of you others who did do those things, you come in. And you know what that did when I read that? I'm like, wait a minute. I was told I was going to go to hell for having dirty thoughts and masturbating, not for not caring for the poor. Nobody in my church told me that I'm supposed to care for the poor. And yet Jesus said, at the last day, I'm going to judge the whole nation on that basis, which begins to upset the canon just a little bit. But again, I can't answer all the objections because you're right. Over history, as soon as Christianity got sucked into the Roman Empire, it became an instrument of imperialism. And I don't know what to make of all of that. There are my heroes within Christianity who rejected some of that, like St. Francis. But then again, he created an order, right? He created an order that ended up being part of the Roman Catholic Church. It's funny that the Waldensians tried to do the same thing a couple of centuries before St. Francis, and they were slaughtered by the Roman Catholic Church. So it's like history is weird when it comes to stuff. But you're right. On the whole, Christianity has been on the wrong side of history far too often, maybe the majority of its history. I agree with you.
And the thing is, it's on the wrong side of history with divine guidance and divine justification. And
if you
I
believe
think
there's a God who puts books into people's brains to write down.
I mean, how else does God communicate?
Through nature. That's why I was saying earlier, if you're going to call anything God,
I
call nature.
Think the God in nature also is it eventually, if you take these concepts to their ultimate conclusion.
Yeah.
If you take it to its ultimate conclusion, Christianity and the belief in the supernatural, otherworldly magical forces de-emphasizes and eventually devalues nature.
I agree.
So I'm going to live on this planet if I'm lucky 80 years. I'm a black man in America. So I'm going to live on this planet till I'm 65, 68 life expectancy.
Let's hope not, bro. I'm 63. You got to get older than me.
That's just the life expectancy of black men in the United States.
I know.
But I'm going to have eternal afterlife. The world, as they used to say in the Baptist tradition, the world is a way station. It's like some weird video game. The planet Earth
I was taught that stuff too.
is a testing ground to deem our worthiness for an afterlife. So who cares if the oceans become acidic or they're saturated with microplastic? Who cares if the old growth forests are cut down? Because the world is just a way station. So
I absolutely agree that
even
that's evil.
trying to say, well, I see God in nature, when the concept of God is one of the main justifications and motivators for us devaluing nature. We were born into sin, the wickedness of the world, and all of the cultures that truly valued nature,
right,
that saw nature as sacred. This is a sacred forest. That's a sacred tree. This is a sacred apex predator. This is a sacred parcel of land. And the Europeans came in and be like, these demonic people worshiping trees and bears. We're going to slaughter the buffalo. We're going to slaughter the wolf and the bear. We're going to dam the rivers. So it's to me, it's an affront to say, well, God is in nature, when once that the dominant religious systems that worship monotheistic deity have no respect for nature.
Right.
Have no, it's kind of like when people say, oh, God is a woman. and you take something that has targeted, abused, dehumanized, and oppressed woman since its foundings, and then try to, play these games with the theology and say, well, God is a woman, or God is nature. To me, that's an affront to the harm that religion, especially Christianity, but it's it's belligerent little nephew Judaism, and it's belligerent genocidal uncle. I mean, Judaism is the belligerent uncle, and his belligerent nephew Islam. You take these Abrahamic Western chauvinistic, male chauvinistic murder cults, and then try to rebrand them instead of saying, no, this is what it is, and this is what it has been, and this is, as far as historical trajectory, what it's going to be. Trying to soften it or rebrand it, or assert that it's something that it was never meant to be and it's never truly is. I think that's another level of harm from my point of view.
Right. And again, as I say, I've only very uncomfortably allowed God language to get into my life. I mean, I shouldn't say that too flippantly. I'm a hospital chaplain. I tried to be a minister for 2 Unitarian Universalist congregations, if you know what those are. They're not.
I know them very well.
They're post-Christian, right? They were Christian, but they're not anymore. And that felt good, so I became a minister in that tradition. And then, but those churches are falling on hard times, and I ended up not being able to hang on to the job I had because they couldn't afford to pay me for the second year of service with them. So I became a hospital chaplain because I got a master's degree in divinity. So yeah, I have to pray with patience. I have to say the Lord's Prayer with patience, and I don't even like the Lord's Prayer anymore unless I can say it in the original Greek, which is a joke. That's a joke. I don't mean it that way. If I can get out of the supremacy, you're right, this hegemony of Christianity, the way they talk about God, and you're right, maybe it's a fool's errand to try to shift the meaning of the language. Well, you may be right,
but there is a difference for Europeans. Christianity can be exploitative,
right?
It can be abusive. But for non-Europeans, for Africans in particular, Christianity is genocidal and oppressive. So for Europeans, we've seen throughout history, they've been able to reform Christianity and create various sects and formations because it came out of their culture. It came out of their worldview, as Dr. Marimba Aini calls it, their asili, their cultural germ seed.
Sure.
It is their concept and their relation, their myths, their folklore, their values. But then when it was imposed on Africans, we are under genocidal oppression across the globe. And one of the biggest obstructions to us understanding our oppression, challenging our oppression, and defeating our oppressors is us believing in Christianity and Islam. If you look at a religious map of the African continent, half the continent is Christian, other half of the continent is
Muslim.
Islamic. Now, if you woke up tomorrow in America and saw that half of white people in America were converting to Yoruba, some Akan, Orisha-based African spiritual system, and the other half of America was adopting some Egyptian tree of life cultivative system, and they were adopting African or Dogon astrological theology, there would be a state of emergency. There would be a state, every resource in Western power would be mobilized. They would go into the schools, they would go into the institutions of higher learning, and they would go into the cultural, they would go to Hollywood, and they would battle this, because they said if we're all very relating to reality and very concept of creation, of origins of not just life, but the origins of reality from an African perspective, we will cease to exist as a people. And that's what has happened to my people in relationship to these religions. And then all those same Europeans are not only saying, I worship Obatala and I have a shrine to Yemaya, and I constructed shrine to Yemaya in my cul-de-sac, in my McMansion in the cul-de-sac in some white suburb. But the God of my ancestors, the Greco-Roman God, is demonic. No other people would stand for that. But this has been normalized and accepted amongst African people. And African people, and as Dr. John Henry Clarke said, if you accept the God concept of another people, you become the spiritual slave of those other people. So African people in particular, we need a theological emancipation.
I agree. I think white folks do too, but that's
yeah,
my
I
job.
think
That's not your job.
I totally agree, but it's another tragic reality in history. As Europe becomes more secular, as the US becomes more secular, Africa, Latin America, Southeast Asia are becoming the strongholds for Western religions. Again, I have to go back to Dr. Clarke. You know, we out Pope the Pope and we out Muhammad. We are the true believers. And now you still, on the African continent, you have people being burned alive and lynched as witches in demonic possession.
Right.
And so the church has never been separated as far as Africans are concerned. The church has never been separated from capitalism, imperialism, colonization, oppression. It has never existed independent of that. And in many ways, it was a false relief, a false cope. Because for my ancestors, the only book they were allowed to engage with is the Bible.
Right.
By law. The only authority we were able to ever saw in a black man was when we were considered chattel, no better than cows and donkeys. We had the plantation preacher who would tell us that our reward is in heaven, and if we serve our masters. I mean, what kind of God gives detailed instructions on the proper way to treat slaves, as opposed to saying slavery is an abomination, like he said homosexuality was?
Right.
So I for many years I've tried to find some rationale, because so many of my people are Christians or Muslims.
Right.
I tried to find some way to reconcile myself with these male chauvinist murder cults. I've tried to say, well, there's got to be some way Africans can adhere to their spirituality and their beliefs, at the same time secure liberation. But the reality is, I don't see it. And I think that even the Christian church understands. That's why so much of the established Christianity is aligned with the institutions of white hegemony, from capitalism to the military to even now they have this big movie production, King David. It's a children's movie. And it's about King David, one of the most wretched figures in the Bible, one of the most horrendous, murderous, sexually deviant people in the Bible. They've made a children's movie. And I saw an advertisement where if you come with an adult, the children get in for free to see the movie. And these are the very people that talk about they don't want drag queens reading, and they don't want to Heather has two mommies, because these are the people that says we don't want to indoctrinate children. And I'm like, they made a cartoon, an animated story about King David, and they're letting children in for free. And these wonderful stories, and it looks like a good story. And my granddaughter's probably going to get to see it. And I think, and so I don't think there's any compromise. And many good Christians are going to say, well, there's good in the story, David versus Goliath. And then we come that forensic archaeologist was like, well, David was had suffered from gigantism. I mean, Goliath. And Goliath probably had poor vision, poor mobility, because if everything in the Bible is true, this man suffered from a congenital hormonal disease. So David murdered a disabled man who was just put up for display and intimidation. And then whenever I see in the movie, the soldiers ran away. It's like, oh, King David slayed the giant, and they ran away. They didn't run away. King David ordered his people to hunt them people down and slaughter them. Right. And even in biblical morality, because they try to pretend, oh, it's a long time ago and we just had different morals. It was understood that you're not to pursue or slaughter retreating armies.
Right. Right. So we're gonna need to wrap this up. It's been an hour, and I'm getting a little cramps in my legs, but that's all right. Thank you so much for your time. I do want to say, I'm probably of the opinion that King David wasn't a real person, although I think they found one rock that has his name on it. So maybe he's real.
Well, King David, Moses, Abraham, I don't see any.
Like I said, the Bible was written, the Hebrew scriptures were written during the Persian conquest, as far as I can tell, if not much before. So, the kind of Christianity I would hope would emerge would be that honest with its sources. But that's a longer conversation. I do appreciate your time. And I do appreciate you. We have a disagreement, but I don't think we're at odds. I think we both want liberation for, in particular, the Pan-African. I'm obviously white. I mean, if you look at my genetics, I got a lot of Scotch, a lot of Irish, a lot of Welsh, and English, and a little bit of French. I mean, I am as white as they come, and I don't like white hegemony, or patriarchy, even though it gives me a leg up in certain social interactions. I want to bring all that shit down.
Yeah, that's true. But I mean, there's a lot of research on how, as Shehu Kuti said, white folks need to liberate themselves. They talk about free Palestine, free Sudan. I encourage white people to liberate white folks, because,
I agree.
If you look at the totality of white history, I always say that Western Europe was a laboratory of atrocities. Europeans didn't reach Africa's shore and figure out how to enslave masses, colonize and systematically exterminate people. They didn't learn that in Africa. They didn't learn that in the Americas.
I mean, most Irish were enslaved.
Right. They mastered those skills before they sailed from the shores of Great Britain, and so so all that to say is this system isn't working for the white majority either, and even the relief and status that the white majority enjoys came as, like, America had one of the most violent labor struggles of any modern industrialized nation. So even white people got their rights in blood. It's not taught to them. I mean. It's funny, we talk about how black people
8-hour work day, the 2-day weekend,
the minimum wage, the minimum wage, OSHA standards. White folks were suffering like hell, and the average white person was like, well, listen, you get a water fountain that the colored folks can't drink from. And unfortunately, many white folks is like, I'll take it. And they shook on that deal. But I tell white folks all the time, you can't eat racism.
Nope.
And throughout Middle America, where I was raised, Ozarks, Appalachia, Northern California, there are white people suffering from everything, all these black problems, crime, addiction, broken homes, all that shit. Where do you think we learned that shit from? So all that to say is, if you think anything, once they done with us, and there have been white, go back to Kent State, there have been white students gunned down. That's why white privilege is such and other nonsense. And I'll leave with this. Even when white folks stormed the Capitol, January 6th, And black folks were all over the social medias and all in the community talking about that's white privilege. If black folks had ran up on that White House, they'd have brought
Yeah.
out the Gatling guns. They would have went and got the old Civil War cannons and slaughtered us. And I'm like, you're missing the key point. It's not because they're white. It's because they're right-wing fascist.
Right.
If white folks had stormed the Capitol for single-payer health care, if white folks had stormed the Capitol because they wanted the Pentagon to be audited or they wanted foreign bases to be closed, if white folks stormed the Capitol, the whitest of white folks stormed the Capitol because they wanted the U.S. government to use its authority to break up these monopolistic multinational corporations, if they had stormed the Capitol for anything other than fascism, racism, theocracy, white hegemony, if they had stormed that Capitol, they would have gunned those white folks down just as soon as they would have gunned Malcolm X or Huey P. Newton down for storming the Capitol. So that's not white privilege. It's white pathology. Because if
I
they
had
had
an argument.
white folks, because throughout history, when white folks mobilized for justice, anti-imperialism, anti-slavery, anti-capitalist, when white folks mobilize for justice, they get mowed down. And that's why many white folks say, hey, I'm going to just click up with my gang and do this right thing, because then I can get away with all sorts of other shit. You even see, like, with many white folks, when they see trouble coming, they revert to become right-wingers because they know they don't get consequences. If I'm a racist,
I watched that in real time
abuser,
growing up.
yeah,
I
what
watched that
Russell
in real time.
Brand? Russell Brand was a leftist.
Oh my God!
And then as soon
we
as
don't have
his
to get on
charges were
Russell
coming
Brand.
down, he says, well, I found Christ and I realized that the left is insane. He became a right-wing Christian. And now, so even white folks know the game and the hustle. It ain't enough to be white. White is insufficient. You have to be white, right-winger, and
patriarchal.
patriarchal. So it ain't white privilege. It's right-wing reactionary pathology is what the problem is.
I agree. White pathology.
Yes.
White hegemony and pathology. That's because being a part of a quote liberal denomination, the white supremacy language is everywhere, the white privilege language is everywhere. But to call it white hegemony and pathology adds some kick. Maybe it doesn't.
Yeah, and they don't want to acknowledge that, like, because the average good white person says, yes, we are supreme, but we should use our supremacy for good. We should use our superior intellect, our superior beauty, our superior capacity to be more fair and give more opportunity to the lessers. So even the white people who claim to be against white supremacy still have a notion and air of supremacy that they don't deserve. So, and when you say privilege, if there is a privilege available in the society, what I would want to do is spread that around, give everyone that privilege. But if your privilege, if you define the ability to abuse, exploit, dehumanize other people, and to commit abuses and atrocities without being held accountable, if you define that as the privilege, and then you're going to spread that around to everybody else, so it's just like morality, decency, goodness itself has been distorted by this system of oppression, and that's why I say revolution is an intellectual endeavor.
Right.
I mean, I think humanity, especially the working class masses, we outnumber our oppressors by the billions, but we don't outthink, we don't understand and comprehend things. So even when the average white man says, well, I'm suffering and there's injustice afoot, and it must be these transgender people, it must be these immigrants, it must be petty thugs on the South Side committing petty crimes against other black people that is ruining my white life.
Right.
And that's why the system did that, because they didn't want people to have a radical analysis. As Michael Parenti said, they did everything in their power to destroy our capacity to have a radical analysis and truly understand our problems. So the white majority is out here lashing out at everybody except the capitalist. And in fact, they want the very people causing the problems for the white majority to rescue them from the problems. They looking at Elon Musk to rescue them, the white race, when he's the number one threat to the white race, and Donald Trump to rescue the white race.
What you got to say is the dude's from South Africa.
Yes, the South African.
He was deep in it. He was deep in it.
Yeah, so
he wants to bring that up here.
Yeah, and I think, the most poorly informed, because white folks as a group has so much money and status in this society, we don't tend to identify their ignorance as ignorance, because we think if you have money, then that money has to is the evidence of the divine. You know, if you have money, then you obviously have some blessings in the favor of the Almighty. You're doing something right. When the reality is, the material reality is, if you have a lot of money, you're probably doing everything wrong and horrible.
All right.
But you know, that's another topic. I appreciate. I know we're kind of going.
No,
all
that's
over
all right. This is you. When you get rolling, and that's okay. I'll put all this up there. I may add a little coda at the end here after we break up. I want to thank you. This has been Bro Diallo Kenyatta. You can find his channel, Diallo Kenyatta, on YouTube, as well as the African World Order channel. I also recommend for my listeners, Black Liberation Media is a good place to start learning about the Black left tradition. Do you have any recommendations for that yourself, other than, of course, your podcast? How white folks can look into the Black radical tradition?
Well, to be honest, I think that the white left needs to be resurrected. I think white people should put their energies into I know that Noam Chomsky.
That doesn't mean resurrect the Democratic Party.
Well, the Democratic Party has never been leftist.
No, I know, but
it's
too
enough
many
white
people think it could be.
There's enough white people in this country. The white majority can create a leftist party, or make the Democratic Party become leftist. Just go to if you are a white leftist. I mean, white folks. I say this all the time. When white people want to be evil, they know how to go Rambo when they want to do evil. But when they become good, they become tree-hugging pacifists. And why not use that white aggression that you're able to do imperialism and colonization? Like, why do the good white people forget how to be white? Again, maybe that's another discussion I would like to figure out.
All right.
When white people become good and realize that there's injustice in the world, they all of a sudden forget how to be white. They forget how to.
I was a pacifist for far too long.
Right. It's just weird to me. Like, all the evil white people seem to be really good at being violent and warlike and subvert and espionage and infiltration and assassination. The good, like, why aren't there more John Browns and Luigis? Because there's a lot of really good leftists. Like, so I'm saying, white folks, if you want to be good and do good, then continue to be white on the left, like the white folks. Why aren't the white folks on the left like the white folks on the right? They just have, the only difference is the objectives and outcomes. The strategies and tactics can apply to both sides. It's just the targets, objectives, and outcomes are supposed to change.
My very good friend wrote an entire master's thesis for history on John Brown. He's planning to publish it as a book. Now, you may not like that he used liberation theology to do it, but he is a Maoist. He is not one of these, liberals or even a socialist. He's a communist. But so there are some white folks, I think, on the real left. But again, we're tiny. Yeah. We're way outnumbered. All right. Again, thank you so much for giving me an hour plus of your time. This will go up on YouTube. I'll send everybody a link. I'll send you a link. Keep watching the channel because I'm planning to start some new regular content creation in January. So everybody,
thank you
have a red Christmas. All right. Take care.
All right. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
What? Okay. I'm looking for the little door. Oh, there it is. All right. Till next time.
See you around. All right, just to wrap up on my end of all this, again, I am planning to create more regular content in January. We're going to be having a sort of rotating themes of religious Christianity themes, and then more what I call interspiritual, post-Christian, ex-Christian, non-Christian, but inclusive. We're going to have that. So I've got two sort of tracks laid out that I'm planning to follow. Beginning in the month of January. So do check in here at this channel, and I will have links for Bro Diallo and for Black Liberation Media, as well as other resources that you can read to learn more about what it means to be a revolutionary, Christian or not, here in the 21st century. And Jesus is a communist.